Good morning, good afternoon, all across this wonderful country of ours from East Coast to West Coast. Good morning, good afternoon, and praise the Lord to everyone all across the country. Welcome to the Chew. We're delighted, very delighted this this afternoon to bring to you the expert panel. This is COVID-19 Continuing Education Conference of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World. And we are so delighted to have the opportunity to share with you expert information, really, about where we are and what we need to do to be safe ongoing. We've been now 20 plus months into COVID. We've come a long way. Not too many months ago, we were introduced to the vaccine, and there's been a lot of issues, a lot of talk, a lot of discussion, and all of that around the vaccine. We're now at a place where we're concerned about our children and vaccines for them and returning to school, the whole gamut of things that are in the public arena that are being bantered around back and forth. Still a lot of vaccine hesitancy, just a plethora of issues that are still very much in the forefront of everyone's thoughts and everyone's mind. And I'm just excited that the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World is able to assemble a panel of experts that we can really talk science, we can talk faith, all at the same time about where we are and what we need to do just simply to be safe. If we do anything with the huge number of people that have transitioned or expired because of the vaccine, the goal is simply to be safe. So that said, as a mere prelude, I want to ask our panel to introduce themselves. Dr. Lillian Robertson, introduce yourself, and Dr. Jane Morgan, follow her with an introduction of yourself.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be a part of this very important conversation. I'm Dr. Lillian Lockett Robertson, and I'm a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist practicing for over 25 years. I'm now here at St. Joseph's Medical Center in Tacoma, Washington. I am a member of the CHEW, Committee on Health, Education, and Wellness with the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World. And I'm also First Lady of Emmanuel Apostolic Church in Bremerton, Washington. I'm excited to be here today. I'm just grateful that our presider has such a progressive mindset and wants to really expose his organization, international organization, to faith and science. I think that's brilliant. And thank you for that, Bishop Brooks. Glad to be here this morning.
Dr. Morgan.
Hello, my name is Dr. Jane Morgan, and I appreciate being invited today. I'm actually a cardiologist by training. I currently lead the COVID task force for Piedmont Healthcare System, which is the largest healthcare system in the state of Georgia, 30,000 employees. We cover about 70% of the geography. My background also includes about 15 years in research. I initially led the cardiovascular research program at Piedmont, where I am now, before expanding to develop research and strategy for all areas, including our organ transplant services, our oncology, our pulmonary, our rheumatology. Prior to that, I worked really in the pharmaceutical and device industry, in research and development, developing drugs, developing devices, taking them to FDA approval and application. So I understand this process very, very, very well. And so have been able to lend my voice as we work to fight this pandemic for the past year and a half.
Thank you for that. This young man to my left really needs no introduction. He is the Honorable Presiding Prelate of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World, doing an absolutely fantastic job. And Dr. Robertson, I agree with you so much. I'm just so grateful at a time like this that God has called this young man to be our leader, and certainly in a very bold way, not only has established this committee on health, education, and wellness, and has supported it and is doing everything he can to make it a tremendous blessing to the organization, but doing an absolutely fantastic job and wants our constituents to be safe and all of that. So, Brother Presider, tell us a little bit about who you are for those who may not know you.
Well, I think you gave him a good example, I guess, of who I am. Um, I'm just a man who has a calling on his life from God to do certain things, and amazed that God has used me to place me to head this great international organization. Thankful, very thankful to what God has done, and thankful that you're here. Dr. Robertson is here. Dr. Morgan, I was so highly impressed with her the last time we were on. I've been talking about her around to other individuals about just the brilliancy and what God has done in their life, and I'm very grateful to that. As you know, back in March, after taking my second shot, I had come down with blood clots that filled both of my lungs, and they didn't anticipate me being here. Matter of fact, they had to move me and put me by the operating room that night because they thought by morning time or before morning my heart was going to stop, and they were going to go through the process of trying to restart me and cut open my chest, they said, and all of that. But God had other plans, and God moved so miraculously until we're now here. We're doing what we have to do. But before I go further, I want to say to everybody watching, take 30 seconds out, call somebody. Call somebody you know. Ask them, are they listening? Are they watching? Go live on and watch this program because this might save your life. And if it doesn't save yours, it can help you help somebody else get the knowledge and understanding that you need so that you can make the determination about what you need to do. Because we're going to talk about a lot of that today. Should I get vaccinated? Should I not get vaccinated? What should I do? Should I wear a mask? Should I not wear a mask? Do I need to do social distancing and whatnot? And Dr. Robinson alluded to some of that. Can you come in the door without your mask? Can you come in and just a bunch of you sit down together in church? I don't know what church you're going to, but where I'm at, it won't happen. But I'm excited about today. I'm excited about what you all are doing, and appreciate the Dr. Morgan taking time out to come and join us again. And I'll just get out of the way, and we can get into querying them and get some answers that we need to help out our people, because our people are being overwhelmed and devastated about this COVID and about other things in life. It's not COVID. We got other issues that are leading to this that is just creating just chaos in the land. So I'll get out of the way, and thank you, Bishop Harrison, for your leadership on this. I appreciate you greatly, man of God. You know that.
Thank you, Bishop. Yes, we appreciate that. And certainly in this day and time, if we need anything, we need faith, but we also need to understand how to be safe.
Yes.
I was talking pre-program or sharing pre-program that we were just in Orlando last weekend, attending the American Association of Christian Counselors, um, a group in excess of 6,000 people that attended the conference. And yet we were able to go in and come back home and still be safe. Tested negative for the virus, mask, of course, every time. And they had a really wonderful way of social distancing by individuals self-selecting a wristband that you could wear to indicate your level of comfort with social distancing, etc. So I know there are ways that we can be safe, and even as we gather, we are, however, an organization that is aging, and we do have to be careful and protect those of us that Bishop are, I guess, have been honored with the title of being a senior citizen. I remember
Well,
several.
we don't call it senior citizens. You have to call it mellowing. My word is we're mellowing down.
Oh, absolutely. Uh, one of my uh, uh, children that referred to me as a senior citizen at one point, and I started to object. but my age tells the story. Nonetheless, we are indeed wanting our organization to be safe. I don't know what other organizations are doing, but the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World is tracking this virus and this information. We've not had an in-person convention in a couple of years now. This 2021 being the second year now that we have not had an in-person convention. I think it's time, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll talk more about that as we move along. Indeed, we have a limited time and a tremendous amount of information that we want to cover. Dr. Lillian, let me toss it to you because you're in the know with regard to this vaccine. You're doing a tremendous job there in Bremerton with the Marvin Williams Center, and you're just in the middle of it all. And with your background and expertise, thank God you're a PAW woman. And so help us understand where we are and what we need to go with in terms of what is the most salient issue or concern that we should be about right now.
Well, you know what, Bishop, thank you for that. One of the things that, I hope this discussion can be this morning is an intersection of science and faith. And what we're seeing now, this global pandemic, we've not seen it before. It's been 100 years since, the Spanish flu. And so now I think the most important thing is to get the right information out. There's been so much misinformation, disinformation. And the way that I'd like to, start us out this morning is to have Dr. Morgan, can you just kind of give us some idea of where we stand as a people? When we always have to think about, of course, the things globally, but when we look at African Americans and the impact of this pandemic on us as a people, and particularly Bishop as church folk, mm-hmm. What Dr. Morgan do you see for us? Are you continuing to admonish the vaccinations, clinical trials? Where are we in terms of the science? Let's kind of break that down a little bit. We could start with that. I'll let you start that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I mean, here we find ourselves now in our fourth surge of this pandemic. And that's number 4. And, you may not be able to remember, but a year and a half ago, we were going to all shelter in place for 60 or 90 days and let this virus pass. And here we are a year and a half later in this fourth surge. And this is our first surge that has been entirely preventable. Wow. This is the first surge that we have had where vaccines were not only available, but readily available, accessible, and free. And so imagine when you are presenting to the hospital or coming into the hospital, and the physicians and the nurse practitioners and the physician assistants and the rest of the healthcare workers there are having to manage you for a preventable situation, put themselves at risk, also put their families at risk, that they also have families that they go home to. And we're beginning to see quite a bit of mental health issues in our staff because it's discouraging. There's despondency. It's disquieting to understand that this is our first surge that is entirely preventable. And yet we are still asking our physicians and others to be on the front lines and continue to battle this scourge when we have vaccines available. Additionally, we have to also manage sort of the ideology oftentimes and the mindset of the patients who are coming in who don't really believe in science, don't believe in vaccines, and yet present to a hospital. And what is a hospital if not a monolith to science and scientific discovery and the application of science? Imagine that dichotomy. And you are working within this dichotomy day in and day out. And this is where we find ourselves in this fourth surge. This fourth surge is also a surge of misinformation. And I think we spent the first 3 surges trying to provide education and information. And it's clear in this surge that we have to actively combat misinformation. And that also requires so much additional effort and so much additional energy, and is also very discouraging and disquieting. I'm often asked about herd immunity and whether or not we can reach herd immunity without receiving the vaccines. Dr. Morgan, I read that we don't need vaccines to reach herd immunity. And that is true. Without vaccines, we can simply allow the virus, it's what we used to call plagues. That's exactly what this is. We can allow the virus to simply infect everyone until everybody has immunity. We can absolutely do that. But here's the difference. It requires us as a society to tolerate a certain amount of death, because it's only the survivors who go on to immunity.
Right.
The others don't have immunity. We bury them. So we have to be able to tolerate a certain amount of death. We also have to be able to tolerate what we call a certain amount of morbidity, meaning suffering. People will be sick and suffer. We have options of the vaccines where we can also reach herd immunity and mitigate death and suffering and bring everybody up to immune status, including our weakest and most vulnerable in the population. So absolutely, we can reach herd immunity without vaccines, but is that the option that we want to have when we have the benefit of science to move a society forward in a healthy manner? I'm often cited more recently about data coming out of Israel, and there's this Israeli data that showed that their citizens who were immunized with the vaccine were actually more likely to be admitted to the hospital, 27 times more likely to be admitted to the hospital than their population that had just gotten infected naturally. First of all, that is an observational study. And although that sounds very official, I think to people who are outside of science, it sounds like something that's probably pretty official. Observational in science literally means we cannot substantiate this data. It is not a randomized clinical trial. It is not blinded. It is not double blinded. We are simply observing this. We are reporting these results, and we can draw whatever conclusions that we want. It is probably not reproducible. The highest levels of science, if you do a study in Israel, I should be able to repeat that study in Georgia and get the same results. Then somebody should be able to repeat it in Argentina and get the same results. And then in the United Kingdom, they should be able to repeat it and get the same results. It must be reproducible data. Observational study, by definition, is not reproducible. So that's number one. Number two, when they look at these two groups of people, they compare those that were immunized versus those who were not immunized, and draw their conclusion that those who were not immunized actually fare better. Don't forget what I just told you about herd immunity and natural infection. What they are not saying, but that scientists understand, is that that group that has natural immunity also had a section that died. And they're not counting those people because they're no longer standing to be counted in the study. So we're not comparing apples to apples. And then another observation in these observational studies is that they only looked at people in January and February of 2020. In January and February, we were rolling out these vaccines to an older population, 65 and older, and those with a lot of medical conditions. Those are also the people who received the vaccine who are protected and received earlier the vaccine, more likely to have a breakthrough infection, because we know the vaccines wane or begin to decrease in their effectiveness after 6 or 8 months. So those who received their vaccines earlier will have that waning effect earlier. And also they were older and had more chronic medical conditions. So again, we're not comparing apples to apples. This is an observational study that drew an observational conclusion. So I'm not a big fan of this movement now of, hey, everybody, let's just do your own research. If you don't really understand the vaccines and you're not sure about the pandemic, do your own research and you will find out what the truth is. And I'm really not a big fan of that. Don't do your own research because most people don't have the ability to understand the research that they are reading. I am not a big fan of do your own research. The VAERS database, VAERS, VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, I'm often confronted hostilely with the data from the VAERS database that the United States collects. We collect this data on everybody. It's self-reporting. Anybody can report all side effects, deaths in there. Thousands of deaths are reported in there. Thousands of untoward events, hospitalizations, anything that you think is related to the vaccine is reported in there. People look up the VAERS database and they say, Dr. Morgan, 100,000 people died from this vaccine in the last year. 50,000 had to do this, had to do that, blah, blah, blah. This is, again, why you should not do your own research. That's not what the VAERS database is. The VAERS database is what we call raw data. It literally means that it's just a dump for anything that any single person wants to think may or may not be related to the vaccine. What happens is that data is then scrubbed. That's a term that we use in science. We scrub the data on the back end. And literally what that means is every single case is adjudicated. Just because you die after receiving the vaccine doesn't mean the vaccine killed you. But it might go into this database. And then those cases have to be adjudicated to determine the cause of death, to determine why the person was ill. Many other things are happening. And that scrubbed data, what we call clean data on the back end, is the data that you never see after all of these cases are adjudicated. So people do their own research, they go onto the VAERS database, and then they have all this sensationalism of all of these numbers that continues to support the ideology really that they are following. And then the last thing that I'll say before I close out, just kind of this introductory statement, is we are certainly also fighting a pandemic of ideology. And I might even go further to call it idolatry, idol worshiping. When you are in that zone of ideology and idolatry, it is very difficult to respond to rational thought and to reasoning. And even the best scientific data is impervious to ideology and idolatry.
Wow.
So where are we now as we are moving forward and trying to push this boulder uphill?
That's awesome. Dr. Lowe, can I?
Go ahead, Bishop.
Dr. Morgan, then what you just said is something that I've been saying, and I don't have the credentials as you had to say it. But then people looking at the news media, the various stations that report this thing, what you talked about, the report from Israel. When I heard that, I was just like, wow. But now listening to your explanation of it, I'm like, even more so like, okay, they are, and I don't understand the whole mechanism of what the media is trying to portray, but we're being duped into a certain way that are preventing us from being able to take care of ourselves. I'm lost because you did it again. You did it again, Doc. You did it again.
Do your own research. Not a big fan of do your own research. Please do not do your own research. Most people do not have the credentials or education or experience to do your own research.
Amen.
People can use scientific terms that sound really official. But when a scientist reads them, the sentence is actually nonsensical.
That's
But
why I
that's
need to
not what
stay
it
in my lane.
sounds like in layman's terms. And then people go off, and it's intentionally written that way, such that you can be led to a certain conclusion. The misuse of scientific language that people don't understand is being misused.
Right.
I think what has really struck me is the idolatry. And sometimes that has led to the politicization of this pandemic. And politics have eroded it and has really trumped the science behind it, because now that we start to think about it, the politics of the mask, you can almost wear a mask and people will determine or decide who you may or may not have voted for. And I think that's really sad because or not. And I think that's really sad because, you know, when we're looking at a pandemic, a global pandemic where people are dying and there's morbidities, being a first responder and working with patients that have COVID every day, pregnant ladies that have COVID, have disease processes, people are really concerned about the science and whether or not the FDA has approved, you know, the vaccination, but nobody really cares about what you're given when you come to the hospital for treatment. You mentioned, Dr. Morgan, that the whole notion of science is in the hospital. Everything, we practice medicine as physicians. And so we use the sciences to decide which medications people could get. That's been a trusted form of healthcare delivery all along. I've just really marveled now why it's so distrusted. And even still, as patients, most of them really have no idea what's in insulin, no idea what's in the blood pressure medications, no idea what's in Tylenol, but we trust it. And it's all based on the sciences, clinical trials, and everything that we are suggesting to certify that this whole process of vaccination and treating COVID, that whole process is real. All of those steps and all of those trials and all of that data that we use to treat patients is still the process we're using. It's just not trusted anymore. And I guess idolatry explains why.
Well, the other term is hypocrisy.
Up to a point. It's not trusted up to a point. It's not trusted when there's the talk of the ideology and the anti-science and COVID doesn't exist. But suddenly the same people show up in the emergency room when they're infected with COVID, and the hospital system is expected to risk the lives and resources of our staff to treat people who don't believe in science, who refuse to follow public health measures, who will not get vaccinated, who are encouraging others and spreading misinformation. But the misinformation and the lack of trust hits a wall when they become sick themselves. And that's why we see in the hospital, the majority, 95% of people who are hospitalized with COVID infections are the unvaccinated. The disbelievers are in the hospital at 95%. So that disbelief is suspended at some point. And there's an expectation that science will save me, and that the scientists and physicians on the front line will provide service and live up to the highest degree of our Hippocratic oath. And absolutely, we will do that. And that's why I say this is simply ideology and idolatry, because the true believers wouldn't come to the hospital, which is exactly what they're fighting against. A true believer would never seek out the bastion of science when they are ill.
And that's the essence of hypocrisy.
Doc,
Idolatry, but hypocrisy.
Doc, what do you think about the new rule that's going around, and I know our hospital here, which is one of the major hospitals on the East Coast, is mandating that everybody be vaccinated. And there's people who work there who see sick people who don't want to get vaccinated. Um, what's your thoughts on that? Because some people are going to lose their jobs. You're already short staffed. You're already under pressure. Like you said earlier, you have staff who have now developed mental issues. The family's got mental issues. I mean, Dr. Harrison, his business has just went up 85, 90% because people
Absolutely.
are seeking help and whatnot. So, what's your thoughts on that? I'm sorry, you all, if I just.
No, Bishop, that's really important. We're exhausted. We're
Yeah,
exhausted when we go to the hospital and we are working with patients that do not believe in the vaccination and are sick, and we are there to take care of them, exposing ourselves and working over hours and putting on gowns and gloves and masks and just the weight of the equipment that you have to wear to protect yourself. It's exhausting and it's disheartening to believe and know that there's something that we can offer to keep this situation from being as severe, and it's not received. But it's received once they enter the hospital and want the treatment. It's dichotomous. And I agree, Dr. Morgan, if you really, really don't trust the science, then why do you even go to the hospital?
but what about your colleagues that don't want to get the vaccine? They're working in the hospital.
They'll lose as of the end of October. In the state of Washington, our governor has mandated that healthcare providers that are working with patients, if you're not, he's not saying you have to get the vaccine, but he's saying that it's required to work at our hospital. So it's going to really stretch us even more because we're already short staffed, and we have a lot of seasoned nurses and seasoned healthcare professionals that are retiring, that have, they're at the end of the line in terms of what type of work, offering that type of work. So we're there with younger nurses, younger staff, and they're not vaccinated. So it's going to be a real problem, a real challenge, particularly as people continue to be sick and the scarcity of healthcare deliverers. It's a real challenge, and we have to think about it. And that's why admonishing the vaccine is still something that we should be willing to do.
Yeah.
So
Hospitals
let
and
me
medical
say
systems
this,
have-
Dr.
Um,
Morgan.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, were you going to say something?
Yes.
Dr. Morgan? Go ahead.
Hospitals and medical systems really have a higher standard to ensure a safe environment, not only for the staff, but for patients and all of their patients' families. If there is any place where you should come and not have to be concerned about catching a disease, it should be in the hospital. We should be practicing science in a demonstrable way, in an operationalized way, at the top of science. Think about patients in our hospital who are exposed to unvaccinated staff. Think about all the things I said in my introduction that I do in research. We've got transplant patients in the hospital. We have an entire ward of transplant patients. We have an entire ward of people on chemotherapy, entire ward of people on immunosuppressive therapy. We owe these people a safe environment. With our staff, we have a higher level of accountability in science, modeling that behavior, I would say, than other industries in this particular situation. And so I agree with mandates in hospitals. If you cannot truly understand and practice science, maybe this isn't for you.
Love it. I love it. I love it.
So we're about halfway through our time together this afternoon. I want to turn the focus a little bit to the whole notion of safety. We're talking to this afternoon to our executive board members, bishops, suffragan bishops, district elders. We're talking about our constituency all across the country and around the world. So with regard to meetings, in-person meetings, with regard to safety, whether that's in a convention or in a churches and so on, given all of the talk about mask mandates and so on, what do we need to do to be safe? Dr. Morgan.
So one of the things I think we should think about is how the language of this pandemic has changed. Earlier in the pandemic, we heard newscasters and people talking about all of the mutations. At some point, that language shifted and we started to talk about variants. Again, this is why language is important. That probably didn't mean much to you, and you may not have actually noticed. It seemed fairly inconsequential, but these are not innocuous words in science. The transition from talking about mutations to variants denoted an escalation in this pandemic. Here's the difference. A variant is actually a cluster of several mutations that have all come together to form a new version of the original virus. That's a variant. That is an escalation. That is why the Delta variant is not the same version of the virus that we were originally combating a year ago. That is why Dr. Rochelle Walensky, the director of the CDC, said with this particular variant, we had to all go back under mask, even the vaccinated, because this variant carried a viral load that was 1,200 times higher than the previous variant. Good. And so therefore, even if we are exposed as a vaccinated person and we may not get sick and won't get sick enough to be hospitalized or die, a very small, tiny percentage, that viral load is so high, there's so many viral particles that we could be contagious and infectious to someone else. We might unintentionally transmit it to someone else because that viral load was so high. Previously, with the previous variants, our vaccines not only protected us, but they kept the viral load low enough that they protected others who were around us, even if we had come in contact with. But the Delta variant changed the game. The vaccines could only protect us, but they could not overcome a viral load that increased by 1,200 times to protect those around you. So we see our vaccines already under challenge with this variant, still holding and protecting those who've been immunized, but under challenge because now we are not able to protect all of those around us. In general, our viral load will still be less than those who are unimmunized, but still high enough to confer transmission. At what point do we not want to get off of this merry-go-round? Other variants are coming. How many warning shots do we need? And that is why we say the unvaccinated are a threat to the vaccinated, not because, as I'm often asked, well, if you can transmit the vaccine and I can transmit the vaccine, what's the difference? Why do I need the vaccine? Here's the difference. Because I'm protected from hospitalization, but the mutations and variants that are developing in you, not in me. They're developing in the unvaccinated population, not in me.
Wow.
So you are posing a risk to me. Because the new variants that are coming out, if one is bigger and badder and stronger, it came from you. And at some point, our vaccines that are already under challenge with this Delta variant might not hold against future variants. That's why the unvaccinated are a threat to the vaccinated. That is why the vaccinated are now also being asked to wear masks as opposed to with the previous variants, because this variant is so much more virulent. At what point do we want to stop going round and round and round and round? What is it going to take for us to understand as a society what we are up against? When we look at viruses and we look at humans and we look at really all life forms, one thing we all have in common is we all strive for life. We struggle to survive. Viruses will continue to struggle to live the same as humans. This struggle of virus versus human. We are the life cycle of this virus. The virus literally cannot survive without human beings. It invades our body, it replicates, it forms these mutations. These are replication errors. If we cannot remove ourselves from the life cycle of this virus, it continues to grow and get stronger. This is why scientists, not politicians, recommended when the pandemic started, everybody shelter in place for 60 or 90 days, because we understood that the virus can't survive if it can't find any humans. So if we shelter in place and remove ourselves from the virus, it will die out. Can we please do this, America, for 90 days? 2 weeks into it, we began shouting about our freedoms and blah, blah, blah. And here we are a year and a half later. How free do you feel? So when we talk about viruses and we talk about humans, we talk about survival of the fittest. In science, the fittest is not the strongest. The fittest is the most adaptable. The most adaptable species always survives. Viruses are quite fit. That is a specific scientific term. So they are an incredible, formidable foe.
Dr. Morgan, we need to give you a license because you preach it now.
I'll sign it. I'll sign it. I got that right here. I will sign it.
So is that also why most of the hospitalizations now are the unvaccinated?
Absolutely.
And is that also
That's not a coincidence. That is not a coincidence. And that data is repeated in every single hospital across the United States, big, small, public, private, academic, whatever state you're in, we have the exact same ratio. Talk about reproducible data. That is not random.
Dr. Morgan, you know, one of the things that we're dealing with now, again, still vaccine hesitancy. Now that the boosters are being introduced, you know, and recently Dr. Walensky talked just recently about that. Do you feel like this new introduction or this new space of vaccination boosters, will that erode the confidence in the vaccine itself for the non-vaccinated folk?
Mm-hmm. So, you know, again, the non-vaccinated, many people, you know, are following this ideology. So what erodes their confidence shifts, right? Because it's not really based on reason. It's based on an ideology. So I'm going to answer that question in a different way. The reason we're talking about boosters is because the unvaccinated haven't been vaccinated, and we're continuing to have mutations, and we're continuing to have variants. And so now we have to be concerned about not only the effectiveness of the vaccines waning, but whether or not the vaccines will hold against not only this mutation, but other mutations and variants that are coming. That is being driven by the unvaccinated population. And so whether it erodes their confidence or not, I'm unable to make a comment on that. When I talk with a lot of these groups, and a lot of them are, you know, conspiracy theorists, and I think I have at least a good degree of experience in talking with them, there is not a response to rational data and rational information. The reason that they come to hear me talk really is to be disruptive and to argue and to create an interjection as an interloper. They're not there actually to gather information. So whether or not this moves them one way or another is unclear to me. What they would need is for their idol, since this is where they are worshiping, they need their idol to give them direction in one direction or another. I certainly am not their idol. I don't espouse to be an idol in anything, right? This is against our Christian faith, and it's not where we're trying to be. I see someone in the questions has asked, isn't science praying at the altar of an idol? If you want to take the vaccine, isn't that idolatry? And, and maybe the bishops can answer that better. But science is just what it is. It's data. It's not that dramatic. If you are reading something, I give lectures on misinformation, and you're feeling emotional and you're feeling angry or upset, and you need to immediately retweet it or repost it, that's probably not science. Science really isn't that interesting. I've never read a science textbook ever and afterwards described it to someone as I laughed, I cried, I was all over the place emotionally. What a good science textbook. Science isn't really that interesting. It's thoughtful, it's deliberate, it's careful. It requires assimilation of information. It requires integration. It requires a certain degree of quietude. It's not really sensational. And so I think, again, in this fourth surge, in this pandemic, part of what we're fighting is this misinformation. We're also fighting the mindset of the culture of ideology that really serves a different purpose that has nothing to do with the vaccine.
If I can say, I don't think that, and I see the question there, it's not about having faith in science. It's about understanding what I need to do in order to protect myself. If I have a toothache, I don't stand in the mirror and get a pair of pliers as they did 100, 200 years ago and pull my own tooth out. I go to what? A trained physician who can then make sure that he takes care of my teeth. I'm wearing these glasses. I've got cataracts. And I went to my eye doctor, and he said, sooner or later, you're going to have them removed. I hesitate. The guy, I switched doctors. One wanted to remove it, but he was too anxious. So I switched from him and went to another one who told me some of the stuff I need to do. So I think we start getting confused, and we start trying to justify our position. If you don't want to get vaccinated, from my perspective, fine. Just wear your mask, do your social distancing. I'll stay in my corner, you stay in your corner. We'll wave at each other. I love you, but you stay over there and I'll stay over here. I think that we in the church have to be careful in our spirituality of crossing that line over when we should stay, as you said before, we need to stay in our lane. And where faith comes in, again, if you have faith enough to believe that God is going to protect you, fine, do so. I'm not going to criticize you. I'm not going to put you down. But at the same time, don't criticize me because I had both of my shots. Don't criticize me because I wear a mask. Don't criticize me because I do hand sanitations. So again, let's not try to cross over what is faith in God and what is science. And we don't want to use it now, but we use it in every other instance. We use medical doctors in every other instance. We use, all forms of medical doctors and everything. So let's, I wouldn't go to, let's say, my eye doctor and tell him that, I have something wrong with my stomach. He's not going to look at, my my intestinal system and see what's wrong with it. That's not his field. So I think we need to stay, keep things in proper perspective and not go off into left field or right field, and try to, make things, amplify it so that we confuse the issue.
So one of the things that really concerns me going forward, of course, is that, as I think I alluded to earlier, I just attended a convention with 6,000 people in attendance. Our general kind of population when it comes to our conventions is about 4, 5, 6,000. Would we be safe? And I don't know that we can project into, say, next year, whether that's in March, where we have a conference much smaller, but next year in August. Would we be safe with 5 or 6,000 people gathering, assuming masking, assuming social distancing, assuming people getting their shots, etc.? Would we be safe?
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Is that for me? Yes. So we absolutely know how to be safe, and we have public health measures. And I think you're absolutely right, Mr. Hairston. We certainly can do that. But as you probably witnessed, certainly since you were in the state of Florida, you probably had a great number of people who really weren't following public health measures and probably were not vaccinated.
Of them were not.
That creates an unsafe environment. So we know how to be safe. It's just, are we going to do it? Just what I'm saying about this fourth surge. This surge is entirely behaviorally driven. It is driven by our behavior. We know how to be safe. We know how to keep children in school safe. And yet we still see all of these outbreaks and all of these quarantines because everybody isn't moving in the same direction. And so these large conventions, while they can be safe, they probably are not. There are probably different pockets in different areas. You need to be very conscious about the decisions you're making, which talks you're going to, which halls you're entering, that which dinners you may or may not attend. You've got to be very conscientious about that and really think. But in general, probably these events by and large are not safe because everybody is not following all public health measures and vaccine recommendations. The safest events are those that have vaccine mandates and public health and masking mandates in order for you to attend, and they are checking and verifying them. So those are the safest ones to attend.
One of the other concerns that I have as well with gathering, the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World is an organization that's, where we have a lot of contact, social contact traditionally. And in addition to that, as African-American people, there are so many more comorbidities that exist among our people. That puts us at even greater risk, particularly in those environments where we're not practicing safe social distancing, and we have so many unvaccinated congregants. So that would be a concern of mine, because we know that our numbers were higher in terms of death rates. Our numbers were higher in terms of severity of disease because pre-existing comorbidities, hypertension, diabetes, obesity. And so with that, coupling that with not being safe or not practicing safety, we just have to be a little bit more concerned. So that's why, your recommendations from a scientific perspective, Dr. Morgan, is real important to us, particularly on this platform.
Yeah, like next year, I'm planning on next year us really having an in-person convention, but I'm also looking at all the data. I.e., I was going to have a meeting, as Bishop Harrison knows, with the board to consecrate several new bishops we made in St. Louis in November. Because of the high numbers in St. Louis, I canceled that meeting and going to do something on a very smaller scale in both of the areas where the gentlemen are from. Come St. Louis next year, the numbers will, one, tell whether or not we should have an in-person convention based upon where the spikes are, how many people. 1 in 9, I believe, is the data that I got a couple of weeks ago, had COVID-19 in St. Louis. So that means that right now it's a hot spot. We're not going. The people there are happy. The church folk there are happy. And so we're moving along progressively to make sure, like we're going to go in March to Tampa. And I'm looking very hard at Tampa. I'm going to be in a smaller group I'm looking very hard at Tampa come January 1st to see where the numbers are at and how the numbers in terms of the people there who are coming down with COVID in terms of how many cases there are, how many deaths there are, and then what do we do to do that? For this individual who Stevenson who posted that, absolutely not. You know, one of the things, and you all forgive me, but I'm just a straight shooter. Our people need to post questions that have some reality to them. And we need to stop going off on the deep end and asking questions that we know good and well that we don't treat people like lepers because they're unvaccinated. I mean,
But one thing, I'll give a scientific answer to that. Lepers did not have any medical therapies, interventions, treatments, or vaccines available to them. And so they were isolated to prevent the contagion from spreading to others. That is not the choice that we have now. And so you're asking, would the unvaccinated be treated as lepers? Unvaccinated have many options. So the answer to that is no, because we have options, and that's where we are in this under emergency use authorization and under FDA approval. So I'm going to give a, sort of a different answer to that. We also have hospitals that are available. And I think if you're concerned that the unvaccinated are treated as lepers, then you haven't been to a hospital lately where the majority of people there are unvaccinated and are still receiving the top level of absolute medical care. So let's not just sort of look over what's happening in our hospitals that are overcrowded with the unvaccinated, and that even people without COVID, in some instances, in some states, are now having difficulty seeking medical care for other conditions that have nothing to do with COVID that hospitals used to treat, because we are not treating the unvaccinated as lepers. And they are in our ICUs, and they're on our ventilators, and they're on ECMO, and they're in our emergency rooms. Other people can't get care because we are not treating you as lepers. But also understand your responsibility in science, that you also had a choice.
Yeah,
and you have to think about what that choice is. I do like what June Summers Harrison says. I really like this. I might incorporate this in one of my talks. Remember, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding are among the 7 spirits God placed into the land. I like that.
Absolutely. Like if you come to church with us, you have to wear your mask. You have to do your social distancing. Everybody has a mask on. I had a meeting with a group of ministers, and one of the ministers was coming up to the door, and he says, "Oh, you require, because it's on the door, you must have a mask to enter in." Now, I'm vaccinated. A good portion of the people are. I still have my mask on. I must wear my mask in the building. We have hand sanitizers in there to make sure, and we do social distancing as we sit in church, because it's critical. Because as you said, Dr. Morgan, we don't know who if people who are unvaccinated and I'm vaccinated, but I can cause them to be sick. That was powerful to me.
Right.
So, Dr. Morgan, let me come back, because we're down to about 10 minutes left. The presider was saying a moment ago that he was checking, numbers and statistics and all of that in reference to our convention next year, or even for that matter in March in Tampa. If we are indeed following CDC guidance with social distancing, with masking, and all of the other hand washing, etc., if we're doing all of those things and our organization requires masking and so on, even vaccinations, should we necessarily be looking at numbers that are affected by the unvaccinated in terms of our gathering? I mean, if we're doing the things that keep us safe, can we meet?
I think you can meet, and there's a responsibility then to make certain you have a facility that allows people to socially distance. That you cap the number. If you know that what your facility is, you calculate what that is, and then you cap the number and you enforce it if you're not able to accommodate everyone, depending on what facility you have. You check in and make certain that there's good ventilation. If you can do your convention during times of good weather, and you can have lots of outdoor spaces where people can gather, or rooms where the doors can be open to the indoors and outdoors. If you're going to require masks, and then enforce it. And then where we always slip, because we're human beings, is we eat and drink. We take off our mask, we start eating, and then we're talking, then we're drinking, then we're talking, and because what? We're social beings. But that's always where the danger lies, when we begin to eat and drink and talk. And so maybe all of those gatherings where you're eating, if possible, they can be outdoors, which is why maybe it's great to find a facility that has outdoors, they're able to set up tents and things. This is where you eat, and in good weather. But absolutely, you can have a safe conference. It requires effort, and it requires people managing it. And then it's going to require people to enforce it and be serious about it. And then, and I think also in your communications that go out to your membership before you come, those communications are very clear what the expectations are. Don't come if you can't follow this. You continue to repeat that. People know what type of behavior is going to be expected of them, because you've been clear and you've repeated it often before they even come. And so you'll see that there could be some peer-to-peer interaction as people hold each other accountable as well, if you make that clear.
So before we have to ask for concluding remarks, Dr. Robertson, Dr. Morgan, talk to us a little bit about children. I think we're seeing a rise in concern about children. Obviously, many of them are not vaccinated, but I'm hearing that there's a rise in deaths among children and in relationship to COVID-19. Is that an accurate presentation of the truth? Yes.
That's accurate and sad. Children now make up 25% of all of our COVID infections. That's really unconscionable, really. The conscience of America. This is where we are with our children. They make up 25% of our infections. Now, by and large, children do well. But here's something to think about. When we talk about long haul syndrome, and I didn't talk about it today, so I'm not going to go into details, but long haul syndrome, just at a high level, are kind of these lingering symptoms that you can have even after you've recovered from COVID. We are now seeing that children are manifesting these, maybe as high as 30 or 40 or 50%. And this is regardless of the fact that by and large, children do well. So the tragedy is that in not protecting our children, that down the road, they could actually have some long-term effects. And we talk about in children, it's a little different. They have GI symptoms, so problems with their stomach, their intestines, their esophagus. They can have some memory issues. They have hallucinations. They have seizures. These are all things that not only can keep you out of school if you're suffering for them, but make it difficult for you to be successful when you're in school. Long-term effects that we're beginning to see in children. Is it really how we want to manage the future and evolution of America, and how we want to protect our most vulnerable population, which is our children? I think what we see in America is quite simply unconscionable.
Wow.
I agree, Dr. Morgan. Just briefly, our children are our future. And what we started to notice and experience in Bremerton, we set up a virtual learning space to bring in children that were socially disengaged and isolated at home, really disengaged from their classroom assignments on Zoom. And it had a tremendous psychological impact with depression and self-esteem issues. And, children need to play and develop. That's how they grow and develop and interact with each other to develop their identity and sense of self. So I think, if no more than just thinking of this, parents, to just not just protect yourself, but think of it in terms of your children and investing in your children's future and giving them the quality of life that I think they should have. Vaccinations for children, I believe, is something we certainly should continue to admonish as well, and not fear, but move into that space, because that's our next frontier of who we are as a people.
Bishop, do you have any any other questions that you want to raise with our expert panel?
Well, but what I want to say is, by whatever means that I have to do it, I would be so honored and love for Dr. Morgan and Dr. Robinson to come live with me on a PAW venue one time, so that one, they can share, because you all have blessed me this morning, and I pray that those who watching have now some information. Um, I talked to those couple people responsible with me for the things that I do, and I can make sure that we fund it. We do whatever is necessary, because this is too great. This is too much information not to be shared with the general public and not to be shared with our constituency across the country. So, um, Dr. Morgan, Dr. Robinson, I would use Bishop Harrison as a vehicle to set up a date and time. And I like to get that on as soon as I can. Our people need to know.
Sure.
And I need to get that. I need for them, instead of me coming on, flapping my lips and not being a professional in terms of this medical issue, because Dr. Morgan, you gave us information. Dr. Robinson, you know how to ask the questions. I'm just going to sit and look at the two of you as you ask the questions and give the answers and help our people. Now, I ended by saying what Solomon said. He said, "My people perish for a lack of knowledge." And we're going to live because we have the knowledge in front of us, and I want to make sure they get it.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. Dr. Morgan, you want to share your closing thoughts? Given all of the information that's been said and shared, I agree with the presider. You have blessed us with tremendous insight and wisdom, and I like the way, Dr. Morgan, you characterize things in practical terms that a layman is able to understand exactly what you're saying with all of this technical jargon and background and knowledge that you have. So, Dr. Lillian Robertson, if you'll close us, give us some closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Bishop. Again, thank you, Dr. Morgan, just for a great conversation. Just a wealth of knowledge. The science is evident, and I think you do such a masterful job with communicating very difficult topics and difficult information to laymen and to others to just give us even more language and understanding of how to help and treat patients on a clinical level. So thank you for being here today. And, one of the things that I agree with you, Bishop, we're going to live because the Bible tells us we perish for lack of knowledge, and we do have the knowledge. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this platform.
Thank you.
And if I could add that if you guys are interested, again, I'm not a proponent of do your own research. So feel free to follow me. I'm on many social media platforms, on Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube. I have my own YouTube channel, Dr. Jane Morgan, DrJayneMorgan. I have lots of media appearances posted there. Even my response on CNN and others to Nicki Minaj, I've got that posted as well. And I also do something called the Stairwell Chronicles, where I sit on the steps and I literally take one COVID vaccine question or COVID question and I answer it in 60 seconds or less. That includes the salutation and the greeting. 60 seconds, straightforward language, coming from somebody just like me, just a normal person, but who can break down the science and explain it to you. I've probably done 60 or 70 of them. Feel free to join my social media, look through the catalog, find a question that speaks to you, click on it, hear me talk for 60 seconds. If you don't like it, it's just a minute of your life, right? You can't be mad. It's literally 1 minute. If you see a question, if you don't see something that's a question that you have, send me a message. I might create a Stairwell Chronicle about it, because if you have that question, others may do it as well. I don't get paid for this. I do this as a public service to my people and to society, and I make it very short and very succinct. Again, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube channel. You can subscribe for free to my YouTube channel. Listen to all the information that you want. If you want 1 hour lectures, you can click on and listen to me talk on different topics for an hour. That's just what you want. If you only want 60-second vignettes, look at my Stairwell Chronicles and just look at things at 60 seconds at a time. That's what I call putting little leaves on a branch. You just put a leaf on a branch every time you get a little piece of information until you fill out the branch. And after a while, you have enough branches to fill out a tree. And we just do it one leaf at a time.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. I don't know about a normal person. You are indeed a gift, and we thank God for Dr. Robertson reaching out to you and bringing you into the fold, so to speak. So again, we appreciate you. We love you to life and pray God's highest and best for you as you continue your work, Dr. Robertson, you as well, and certainly our presider. We had the roundtable discussion that preceded this discussion that we've had as experts. And so this entire contribution that we've made to the PAW via the CHU, I think it's been very helpful, and thank God for it. We've done this now for the third quarter of this year. We have one more presentation before the end of the year in the fourth quarter. We don't know what that's all going to look like, but pretty clearly, it's really important that we get this information out to our constituency and welcome those even that are not, but are all across the country and around the world to hear what we have to offer and what God is using all of us to accomplish within the body of Christ. So thank you all. Yes.
Bishop Harrison, I just pulled up Dr. Morgan right on YouTube. So the doc telling you to go right on YouTube. Go right on YouTube. Don't wait. Go on YouTube. Go on Twitter. Get the info. I just pulled her up right there. I'm watching her now. She's explaining why vaccine is still recommended for people who already got COVID. Go. CNN newsroom with Rosemary Church got Dr. Morgan on there. Go get it. Get some information. Don't perish for lack of knowledge. Go get it.
Absolutely. Thank God again for social media and how we're able to use those platforms to really be a blessing to the people of God. Thank you all again. We are indeed going to celebrate this discussion this morning, this afternoon, all across the country. And we look forward to the next opportunity we have to share with the constituents of the Pentecostal assemblies of the world. We want you to be safe. We want you to be healthy. We want you to be able to get through all of this and still serve the God that we love and the God that we worship, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So may God bless you again. Thank you all, and we will be back again in due time. So God bless you all across the country. PAW, we love you to life. God bless you.
God bless you all.
Bye.
Love you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.